welcome to today's mini lesson. We are going to be doing stages of learning today. Now, stages of learning is from the skill acquisition part of the course, and what we're going to be looking at is what a motor program is and how the development of a motor program over time can be described in 3 different stages, and what a coach can actually do, not what a coach can do, but different strategies of feedback that a coach could use at each stage of learning to best support the performer that's trying to learn. So to kick things off, we are going to start with what a motor program is. Now, in its simplest form, it's a set of instructions which we store in our long-term memory. So just like for baking or making a cake, there is a recipe list. Okay, there is a set of cooking instructions. Now, alone, that set of instructions can't be eaten. That's not actually the cake. It's just a series of things that need to be done at some point in the future in the real world that will actually make the physical cake in the end. But those instructions, they're stored inside of our long-term memory. And at will, we can pull them out of our long-term memory and then run through the series of chemical reactions inside of our brain which send out these messages via our neurological system to actually activate certain muscles with certain forces in certain series or timings. So that set of instructions gets sent out by our brain to our working muscle, and it produces the movement. So it's this relationship between brain and body. So a motor program is a set of instructions stored in our long-term memory that, when initiated, tells our body how to move, how to contract with how much force, how much speed, the sort of timings of everything. And gradually, as we grow, as we develop, as we learn, these motor programs become a little bit more refined, or we might start to make multiple versions of it and vary them slightly. So, for example, as a young child, you can begin to learn to walk. You put one foot in front of the other. It's very sketchy to start with. Balance isn't quite there, the speed isn't there, and a little toddler might only manage 4, 5 or 6 steps in a row, and then they fall over. But through trial and error, through this self-discovery period, gradually their brain begins to refine that set of instructions that it sends out to the body's muscles, and it makes it better. Because every time the baby falls over, it knows not to do it like that next time. If the baby takes 4, 5 or 6 steps more, then the brain knows that whatever set of instructions it just sent out, they worked better than last time. So it's going to start to remember that one and discard the old set of instructions. Now, as that child gets older, they'll start to try and move it in a little bit faster fashion. Well, that's a jog. And then faster still, that's a run, that's a sprint. So we always make copies of these motor programs, and we might modify or tweak them ever so slightly, and suddenly, by the time we get to adolescence or adult life, we've got multiple motor programs to fit multiple situations that we've refined over a longer period of time. So if we were to look at the level of learning of a toddler, they'd be way down here, compared to an adult in that same skill of walking or moving on 2 feet, they'd be way up here. And we've also got the next level up, which are the professionals, the sprinters, the marathon runners, the power walkers, the ones who refine the adult skill of walking to an even greater level of detail and accuracy. So a motor program is that relationship between brain and body, the set of instructions that we fire off through our neurons to contract muscles in a certain way. Now, stages of learning, that relates to the different phases of, we could say, quality of a motor program. Now, there are 3 stages which were proposed by 2 psychologists, Fitz and Posner. Okay, Posner at the time of filming is still alive. Fitz, unfortunately, not so. He died quite young. But Fitz and Posner, these were 2 psychologists, and they came up with 3 stages of learning. Now, this isn't to say that you are a beginner, an intermediate, and then an advanced, and that's it. It's not saying that you must be one of the 3 stages, and everyone inside each stage is exactly the same. That's not what they're saying. It's almost more of a category or a phase, And you can be just entering one of the stages, and then you can improve, and you come towards the end of that stage, and then you can go into the next one and then improve even further. So it's not discrete. Okay, these are almost it's an analog scale. So you can be anywhere along the path, but along that path there are 3 separate phases or categories. So if we was to look at it on a graph, for example, and someone getting better and better and better and better, it might be that we've got this first section here is our first stage. Then we've got a middle phase of learning, which is the second stage. And then we've got the third phase, which doesn't really have an end because technically learning can get better and better and better infinitely. Okay? So these 3 phases, we're going to look at what they are, so the titles of them, and then some characteristics of skills or motor programs in each phase, and then also what coaches can do with feedback to help progress learning most effectively. So the first one, the first stage that we have, this green zone, if I put it in green in fact, we have cognitive. So the cognitive stage of learning. Okay? Now cognitive refers to the mind. So what this in essence is saying that the person or the learner, the performer, they spend most of their time and thought and energy thinking through the action that they're about to perform. There's a lot of thought that goes into producing the movement. So think about yourself, whenever you're learning a new skill, and you've tried something for the first time, or you're in the first year of learning perhaps, you have to work really hard to think about exactly what you want to do, what the outcome is going to be. You haven't got time or focus to be thinking about smaller things like your wider environment or an opponent, or how you could make it better to adapt to the situation that's unfolding in front of you. You're thinking about the core things that you can control. So if we go back to that toddler who's first starting to take some steps, the only thing that their brain will be trying to process is maintaining balance, moving one leg in front of the other without falling, then the other leg without falling. But now, you would be in the third phase, you'd be way up here with your walking capability, because you can take multiple steps in a row and you're not even thinking about falling over. Think about riding a bike. Once you've learned how to ride a bike, you don't think about the wobble. You're thinking about speed, you're thinking about when to turn, you're thinking about your pedal rhythm. You're not thinking about that fundamental part of staying upright on 2 wheels with your centre of mass above the base of support. So cognitive stage of learning is this first phase, this first stage, and it covers novice, from absolute beginner up to the initial stages of learning. And if we think back to characteristics of the skillful performers, that mnemonic ACE face, where we've got aesthetics, we've got control, we've got consistency, we've got economical movement, we've got fluency, we've got efficiency. Those descriptors of skillful performance, we can use these when describing each stage of learning. So what I would say here is, for the cognitive stage of learning, we're looking at performances that are not aesthetic, that they are not consistent. So the performer does one thing one time and then could do something completely different by accident the next time. They don't have consistency, there's no repetitiveness in there. If they're doing a slightly longer movement like triple jump or the high jump perhaps, there's no fluency to their movement, they don't transition smoothly. It's very influent or non-fluent, whatever the phrase would be. Okay, so we can use those characteristics. If I just put that down here as well actually. So ACE face, ACE face. We can use those skill characteristic descriptors when describing the 3 different stages of learning. So the first one is cognitive, that's your beginner. Now our second phase is we have associative. The associative phase or stage of learning. Now what this word essentially means is the performer's beginning to associate a thought with an outcome. They're beginning to remember patterns in the environment that unfolded last time they tried it, And they link that, they associate that with what they tried last time and what worked and what didn't work. So they're beginning to make these links quicker, more powerfully, and more accurately from the last time that they did it. They're not thinking up a solution on the spot, which is very much a cognitive stage learner. They're not inventing a solution. They're beginning to think back and associate their current surroundings with where they've been before. So this could be within a few months of learning something, or a couple of training sessions. We're not talking about professionals here. They would have already gone through this phase. So associative, when we start to think about the descriptors, they're becoming more aesthetically pleasing. They might be able to start putting more time, energy and focus into the position of their limbs to make it look better. Because they're not thinking about so much anymore. They begin to relegate the motor programs. They begin to be able to run them off a little more accurately without as much thought. So they've got extra thought and energy and thinking capacity to spend on other things, to make it more fluid, to make it more controlled, to make it more aesthetic. Now they haven't got that much spare focus or energy because they are only halfway or part way up this learning curve. And they haven't done it too many times and get complacent. They don't know it inside and out yet, but they're beginning to associate the evolving environment with where they've been before. And if you can remember faster and more accurately what you did successfully last time, well, that's going to help you create a solution in the moment far better, far more easily. So cognitive stage 1, associative stage 2, and thirdly, we have the autonomous stage. And just that first part of that word there, auto, everything becomes automatic or autonomic. It becomes a lot more almost on, what's it called, autopilot. You can do a lot of the skills without really thinking about it. So you've got most of your energy and focus and thinking capacity to spend on the smaller details, such as an opponent's movements, or an opponent's level of fatigue, or a slight stumble in their footwork, or perhaps a stumble in your own footwork, so that you can then adjust at the drop of a hat and create a brand new motor program on the spot. Because you've got that amount of capacity available in your mind to be thinking quickly about the solutions to the problems that are arising in front of you. So cognitive, we have to think very hard about what we're doing in the moment. Associative, we begin to think back to our previous attempts and we can start to associate with where we currently are and where we have been, and we can select the most effective solutions we've decided to use in the past. And then autonomous, we start to do things automatically. We don't even think about what we're doing anymore. So for example, toddler learning to ride a bike, using the stabilizers, falling off. Associative, possibly a slightly older child or an adolescent who can now ride a bike on two wheels without the stabilizers, but they're just thinking more now about straight line speed, or they're beginning to enjoy learning how to turn left and right. All the way up to perhaps an adult who can now cycle on the road and they're now more aware of cars going in different directions, potholes coming up, traffic lights, because they've got more capacity to be thinking about the environment, because the skill itself, the motor program of cycling, is becoming easier and easier to do with less and less thought. And then we have the autonomous phase, where we probably have the pro cyclists, the track cyclists, where they're thinking tactically about the condition of their body, their level of fatigue, the position within the nearest centimetre or metre of their opponents or teammates. You know, within the Tour de France, a team has to work together over hours and hours and days of competition, and a win could be decided by the amount of drag the eventual sprint cyclist experiences throughout the rest of the race. So if they're a couple of centimetres too wide of their teammate and they're not drafting properly, then they're going to be more fatigued come the final sprint. So that's the level of thinking that they're doing. They're not really thinking about riding a bike. It's everything that goes into the race and the tactics. but it's the same skill. And there's multiple different points. So if you were to line up 100 cyclists, guarantee they all be at a slightly different phase of learning. But Fitz and Posner, they came up with this stages of learning theory, and they came up with 3 broad categories that we can slot people into: cognitive, associative, autonomous. Now, when it comes to feedback and improving a performer in each stage, there's different techniques which are better at different stages. Now, the first one, in the cognitive stage of learning, we want everything to be positive. Everything to be positive. From someone else, okay? We also have in there something called self-discovery. I'll just put self-discovery, or trial and error. That's a fancy way of saying that. So that's like a toddler trying to learn to ride a bike. They ride a bike, they fall over. They tried it, they made an error. Trial and error, self-discovery. They learn it by themselves. But anyone who's commenting, so a coach who's commenting on a cognitive learner's performance, it needs to be positive. It needs to be promoting, well, it needs to be preserving confidence, boosting motivation so that they carry on participating. Participation, confidence and motivation. Positive feedback can protect that. So we tell them what worked, what they've done well, what they're doing right. We don't pick it apart. And if we were to analyse a toddler riding a bike to the same standards of a professional cyclist, we'd find everything wrong. They'd probably only do one thing right, and that was the second that they actually kept their balance. So we tell them what they're doing right so that they can start to draw out that particular part of the motor program and remember that particular part. We don't tell them what's wrong because that will demotivate them. And if they don't carry on trying, then they won't be able to complete self-discovery. So we tell them good things and we let them try it out. In the associative stage, we still keep things positive. We still tell them what I liked, what went well, what they should do more of next time, what to keep inside that motor program. We're not too fussed at the moment, particularly in the initial parts of the second stage. We're not too fussed about negative things. There's still plenty of things that we just want them to keep. And if they keep that thing, that good thing, that will take the space of the error. So we're correcting them in that way. Now what they'll also start to be able to do is use intrinsic feedback. Intrinsic feedback. This is knowledge from within, or feelings from within. So someone riding a bike, as they're pedaling, they'll be able to feel, kinesthetically, when they lose their balance, when their body's not quite feeling comfortable on the bike. They'll feel that. Someone watching might miss it. But the person riding a bike who has ridden properly before, in one of their previous attempts, they'll jump on a bike, they'll go for a ride, and they'll feel like something's wrong. They felt how it should be, and this doesn't feel like that, so I must be doing it wrong. That's intrinsic feedback, when we compare our current, in-the-moment performance with a previous success story. And if we're not doing it as well as we have done before, then that person will know that they need to change something. I always use the example of golf. I've hit a couple of golf balls purely, a couple of times, and I know exactly how that felt. It pinged, it zipped, it felt brilliant in my hands. Ball went nice and straight, everything about it felt good. Haven't hit one of those in months, if not years. And every time I hit a golf ball now, I know that it's not quite up to the same standard as that one pure shot that I've done before. That's intrinsic feedback. I don't need a coach to tell me that. I can sense that it's not as good. So we keep things positive from a coach's standpoint, and we start to use or build on or encourage them to use intrinsic feedback. Lastly, the autonomous phase. So these are our pros, these are our elites who, their learning curve probably isn't as steep anymore, they're just making small adjustments. And to make those small adjustments, we want to focus more on the negatives. Focus more on the negatives. And because We're looking for real small issues, minute details. We're going to need video analysis or some form of tech to slow it all down, to zoom in, to analyse the biomechanics, to really pick apart whatever they just did so that we can generate some negative feedback. What did they do wrong? 95% of their skill, their motor program, is probably perfect, especially up towards this point here. Now, how does the world record holder in a sport get feedback? They're technically the best, but they'll still want to be improving because that's the nature of a person who's made it to the world's best spot. They'll still be looking for negatives, things that they can work on. But to get that, we need that specialist feedback, that in-depth detail, video analysis. And that is the stages of learning, proposed by Fitz and Posner, the 3 stages: cognitive, associative, and autonomous. How can we describe them and how can we describe the developments? We can use our mnemonic ACE-FACE, which is aesthetically pleasing, controlled, efficient, fluent, accurate, consistent, and economical or efficient, whichever one I didn't say. And that is that. So I hope you found it useful. And yeah, I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye for now.